Welcome to the Intellectual Freedom Podcast. Here we analyze politics, culture, technology, personal growth and development, and society at large through the lens of critical thinking and open-mindedness, not demagoguery and partisan hyperbole. I'm Dr. David Hopkins, humanities professor, your host and guide. So without further delay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, and I have a real treat for you here today. You know, this podcast, we like to challenge basic assumptions. We don't want to fall into this ideological dogma. And you know how I always talk about using critical thinking to reach full conclusions as best that we can reach them anyway. And we're going to put that to the test today. I have with me Mr. Jimmy Fritz on the podcast. He is an author. He's a filmmaker. He's a musician. He's even an aficionado of Stoicism, which we've even talked about a few times on this podcast, just to name a few. But I think the real fascinating aspect of his life and his story is that he's a self-proclaimed ethical drug dealer for nearly 50 years now. So he published a book. It's called Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer, a psychedelic travel log memoir. And I am so pleased to have you on the podcast with me today, Jimmy. So why don't you let's just jump into it and you give us some of your background and maybe an introduction on your life and led to this book that you wrote.
Well, I've had a kind of an alternative life, I guess you'd call it. I grew up in England and went to school there. And then I started traveling when I was fairly young. I was 17, I hit the road and toured Europe for several years. And I was playing guitar in the street.
Wow.
And making a living. Finally, I traveled for about 10 years on the road and all in Central America and Southeast Asia, went overland to India, did the hippie trail in the 70s. And so, yeah, it's been a long and storied story.
I can see a lot of miles covered.
And along the way, so I wrote this memoir recently, Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer. And it's basically all my travels, not all my travel stories. I mean, one of the most difficult things was to figure out what to leave out because there's so many stories there. So I kind of try to boil it down, make it as concise as possible. But it's basically a journey through life, a journey through many different countries, and a journey through the use of psychedelic drugs, which I was introduced to, at 15 years old, and been using regularly since then for the last 50 years. Wow. And, looking back, I have to say that they've done nothing but good things for me. There's been no downside at all. And they've done nothing but, enhance and improve the quality of my life. So that was the overarching theme of the book was how that happens and why that happens and what's going on in the world today with psychedelic research, which is, there's so much stuff going on at the moment. I couldn't even list it all. The second to last chapter is basically a summary of what's happening with psychedelic research. There's a kind of a psychedelic revolution in psychedelic psychotherapy, basically. And so there's, now that they're becoming legal everywhere, they're actually being able to be studied. And there are a lot of really, really credible, organizations around the world that are looking into what they're good for and what they work for and what they don't work for and the problems and whatnot. And so it's a very exciting time for psychedelics. They're really coming into their own right now. The problem being is for the last 50 years, they've been illegal, so nobody's been able to really study them properly. Right. Now that's changing very quickly, so it's pretty exciting.
Excellent. Yeah. And Jimmy, one of the things in browsing through your book, and I think this is a good place to start for the audience, you draw a very clear line of distinction between, I believe you coined the good drugs, quote unquote, good drugs and bad drugs. So could you kind of, because for the person who doesn't understand this topic, well, kind of talk about the differences, because sometimes they all get lumped into exactly the same category and they get stigmatized exactly the same way. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, this is a big problem, and it's always been a big problem with drugs, is that people just think drugs bad, end of story. But you have to be very specific. When you're talking about drugs, you've got to be very specific about what you're talking about, because there's a big difference between, a magic mushroom and a flap of crack.
Right.
They're a world apart. So I talk about it in the book. I have a piece in there called Dumb Drugs, Smart Drugs. So smart drugs are the ones, basically psychedelics, and they're the ones that improve and enhance your perception and awareness of the world, and therefore, improve your quality of your life. The dumb drugs are the ones that are done for exactly the opposite reason, but for exactly different people, because they're doing it to mask their problems. Basically, they're the ones that decrease your perception and awareness of the world, and therefore destroy the quality of your life. And they're done for complete opposite reasons, really. People do psychedelics because they want to engage in their life. They want to engage in the world around them more fully, more completely, more intricately. Mm-hmm. And they do the dumb drugs to screen themselves and to shut down and to protect themselves because they have problems. Most people, most addicts have underlying psychological problems. They're not doing heroin and crack and speed for fun. Right. They're doing it to get a respite from their psychological trauma, from the psychological crises that they're going through, and that's the only relief they get. I say that in the book. Like the best thing in the best thing in a junkie's life is heroin. Right. Because that's the only relief they get from their horrible life and their horrible situation. Now that's a completely opposite and opposed situation to psychedelics, because they actually increase your involvement with yourself and with you, in your own mind and with your own life. So it's completely opposite. And we need to make these distinctions because too often people just think, oh, drugs, they're bad, blah, blah, blah. And it's just not true. And I think we're finding that out now with all this new research that's going on. They're finding out that you can actually help and cure a lot of addictions and alcoholism and anxiety, depression, and all these things can actually be treated with psychedelics, so-called drugs, right? Right. So that's the new wave that's happening right now. It's a very, very promising area.
Yeah, as I was working on my doctoral degree, I was really drawn deeply into the Greeks, the ancient Greeks especially, and I was fascinated by the cult worship of Dionysus. Yeah. And I even wrote a book, Truth Beyond Intellect, on that, where that was mainly mythological archetypes and the reincarnation of this god. I don't want to go into that, but I was exposed to this idea of psychedelics and pathogens. And of course, alcohol is possibly being used to invoke religious experiences inside of the ancient Greeks. And, I even got exposed to some really notable ones like Roland Griffiths and Walter Clark Houston, some of these big names, and, looking back to the past and trying to find the psychedelic experience, tying to shamanistic religions or even the Dionysian cult worships. But when you mention these good drugs, this psychedelic experience that you reference as being so positive in your life, from your own perspective, can you kind of explain, what is that practice for somebody who's never tried a psychedelic drug ever, and they hear, it has the potential to tap into really inner meaning, inner peace, inner whatever it might be. What is that like in practice? Is there a way to put that in words really to explain that?
I think it happens on a lot of different levels. I mean, on a neurological level, it actually rewires your brain. So what happens when you take LSD or psilocybin is you're creating new neural pathways for the same experience. So when we have an experience in life, we map a neural pathway for that experience. So that's set. When we have the same experience, we map the same neural pathways and it becomes an ordinary experience. We look around us and we see the objects in our world and everything's mapped the same way every time. When you take a psychedelic, it rewires, it reroutes the neural net that you're making in your brain, and it creates a new experience. So you see something for the first time, and that's why people stare for an hour at a flower, because they're seeing it in a completely different way because there's a new neural map that's now projecting onto their map of reality. So it changes that, and it makes you see things in a completely different way, and that's the value of that can be a very valuable experience because people get stuck in these modes of thinking. They get stuck in their ruts, in their depressive modes or their anxious modes or their neurotic modes. And it can break that cycle. It can actually break out of that. And then you go, oh, there's a new way of looking at things. There's a different perspective here that I can look at. And psychedelics give you that perspective.
Wow.
And that's just one aspect of it. I mean, and they're very inspirational. You can go for a walk in the woods on half a hit of acid, and you can just be wonderfully inspired about life and feel connection. One of the things that one of the classic psychedelic experiences, ego dissolution. So you actually lose yourself, and you have a sense of yourself as being a part of everything else. It's a experience of union, of unity. And a lot of people never get that. They're disconnected from themselves. They're disconnected from their families. They're disconnected from their communities, and we're all basically going mad. So what psychedelics, the promise of psychedelics is that they can reconnect you with yourself and reconnect you with the world and give you a more positive and creative outlook and improve and enhance the quality of your life.
Yeah. And so can you tell me, Jimmy, on the bad drugs list, you take, the Oxycontins, you take the opioids, you take the crack cocaine. There's intense negative side effects to these drugs. I mean, they're just so well documented of how horrific the crash off of some of these things over time is. Does that happen similarly when you're take a psychedelic drug?
No, it doesn't. No, because you're doing it for the completely different reason, and it has the complete opposite effect.
Really?
You take Oxycontin or heroin or any of the opiates. People are taking those to suppress their pain and their anxiety and their desperation. It's to mask that. They're doing it to mask those things. Whether it's physical, sometimes it starts out with just physical pain. A lot of people get addicted to opiates through painkillers, through legitimate reasons, through back problems or pain, injuries. And then they get hooked because they're also addictive. Something
right.
Psychedelics are not. Psychedelics are not physically addictive, but the opiates are. So you can get hooked into those through pain relief, which is physical pain, and then that becomes psychological pain. And a lot of addicts are just trying to kill psychological pain. So they're actually self-medicating.
Right.
But it's a dangerous way to do it because there are negative side effects, and they, of course, are very addictive and sometimes really difficult to get off.
Right.
Unlike the psychedelics, which are not addictive, and nobody ends up in a back alley on LSD.
Right. Yeah. So, well, I sorry to flash back because I do this all the time, but going back to the Greek history and you read about like the Eleusinian mysteries. It's kind of a cult worship tied to Demeter and Persephone and this goddess of harvest and agriculture. But anyway, there's a city, Eleusis, and men, women, slaves, even emperors, they would go to Eleusis to drink this magical potion. It was called, when you read it in the Greek, it's literally called a magical potion, and it's supposed to bring on healing and spiritual insights. And now what we're starting to figure out that was probably psilocybin is probably what they were using.
Yeah, it's quite speculative, though. I mean, people have speculated about what it might be. It was something that elevated the spirit. It could have been a psychedelic. It was called kaikanon.
Yeah.
And so there has been a lot of speculation that there's no reason why it wouldn't be, but it's hard to say exactly what psychedelic it would be.
Right.
But it did seem to be some kind of a psychedelic. So yeah, all night dance parties with psychedelics sounds like a rave to me.
Yeah, I know. That was the thing, when you read that and you hear these stories of the all night raves. There was just a huge one in Tampa. I'm in Tampa, Florida, and it's just like a massive, 10,000 some people, and it so much sounds like that. But I think even more importantly, that people, whether they were slaves, emperors, or whatever station in society, they would make these trips, these spiritual journeys to the city to go through this. So there was incredible, and the words of spiritual healing or even physical healing or reconnecting with self were used. But you mentioned right out of the gate about some of the research that's going on in the psychedelics, and some of the amazing things that are going on, groundbreaking in curing disease, whether it might be schizophrenia or depression, or I even saw something in preparing for this podcast, even helping people quit smoking in some cases.
Yeah,
That
because it
so
changes the way you think, right?
yeah. So can you talk about, some of the stuff that's going on that 30 years ago would have been probably non-existent or even thought of
Well,
in regards to this?
it was about 25 years ago that Rick Doblin was at Esalen with Terence McKenna, and they were sitting around and they were talking about the difference between natural drugs and unnatural drugs. And Terence McKenna said, "Oh, you have to do the natural drugs because they're imbued with spirits and animal spirits and all this nonsense."
Right,
So,
right.
and Rick Doblin challenged him on that. He said, "No, actually, MDMA, which Shulgin was making at the time, he said this is actually very, very useful, and a lot of therapists are using it, and it has legitimate, psychiatric and psychological use." McKenna challenged him on that. And he said, no, because it's made in a lab, it's not going to be of any therapeutic value. So that spurred Rick into getting together with these 10 people at Esalen on that weekend. And they all put in $1,000 and they started their quest for researching MDMA as a therapeutic prescription. And that's how it started. And then 25 years later, MAPS, which is the organization that Rick Doblin founded, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, they've been working on legitimizing and studying MDMA for 25 years. And it's now, a year or two away from a prescription medication for PTSD.
Wow.
So that was a very long journey. Talk about tenacity. I think Rick Doblin's done more for the legitimization of psychedelics than anybody else in the history of the world.
Yeah, that's incredible. So and I don't want to get too scientific, but do you know what is it with these psychedelics? Have they figured out, like with the schizophrenia patient, that can relieve those? So what's going on with this?
The unique receptors, the what is it? The H2A receptors. They're serotonin. I can't remember the exact term.
Right.
Serotonin H2A, I think it is. It's a receptor that's unique to LSD and psilocybin, and they just bond in there. And there's something wrong with that receptor. It's a serotonin imbalance, basically. A lot of these mental illness, anxiety, depression, it's to do with serotonin malfunctions. Either the serotonin is released into the brain, and then there's a reuptake function that brings it back and stores it again, and then it's released. Well, a lot of the psychedelics, they release the serotonin. And if you have a lot of people with depression and anxiety have a problem with that system, they're not making enough serotonin, or they're not reuptake. The reuptake function is malfunctioning in some way. And psychedelics, perhaps, and this is certainly speculative, but perhaps can somehow repair that system, or at least give it a boost. Like the antidepressants they're using now are SSRIs, they're serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So what they do is they prevent the uptake function so that more of the serotonin stays in your brain and is available and levels your mood, which is one of the things that it does.
Yeah. So for patients on any of these type of things, and if they would take any type of this drug, would it, can you, I don't even know how to word this properly, can you still go about functioning in your, let's say you're on you're on it for depression, right? Can you drive? Can you go through, or is it, how does this impact your daily life, just on a functional level of going through your day?
Well, the way that most people are using psychedelics therapeutically these days for anxiety, depression, addiction is they're microdosing.
Okay.
When you microdose, you're taking a tiny dose, which triggers the response in your brain, the serotonin response, and it hits your receptors, but it doesn't get you high. So you don't have any psychedelic effect. So if you take, an average dose of LSD is 100 micrograms. So if you take 5 micrograms or 10 micrograms, somewhere in there, it's such a small dose that you don't actually feel any physical effect. You don't have any, visual effects, or you don't feel high at all. So what happens is it just has that very, very mild background effect of regulating your serotonin system. People are microdosing psilocybin, they're microdosing MDMA, which actually is not that successful as a microdose because it doesn't have an active effect to you actually start to feel it. But yeah, there's a explosion in microdosing. I mean, I know dozens of people that are microdosing now. Lots of people that have even never tried psychedelics before are trying microdosing because they've been on these SSRIs for years. They don't really work that well. They work for some people, they don't work for other people, and they can cause more problems than they're trying to solve. I mean, people commit suicide on SSRIs.
Wow.
Not a very good ad for the
no, that doesn't look good at one of the.
You'll feel better.
That's not one of the positive disclaimers at the bottom of every ad. That's for sure.
Major side effects, suicide.
Yeah, right. So I want to shift gears for a second. I saw in your book you mentioned some of the Nixon administration, I saw, and their anti-drug crusades that were really intense. And I mean, that didn't get any better when you move forward to the Bush and the war on the drugs and the Ronald Reagans and pretty much every president in between. But I had a fascinating conversation on a different podcast with a lawyer who lives in Bogota, Colombia, born and raised. And we were actually talking about all the political upheaval that's going on in Latin America. But he made a comment about the cartels and about the power and the drug trade and how insidiously they impact every aspect of life there. And he made the comment that he thinks it's time to legalize all drugs. Because this quote unquote war on drugs, whatever it is, however it was, it doesn't work. It's not working. It never has worked. So, I mean, do you think that's a good idea? I mean, to legalize all drugs, or do you just see this more as, being able to make it legal so we can get the research done so that we can make research advances with your psychedelics, but just in general terms, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I do support the legalization of all drugs, and everywhere that it's been tried, it's worked very well. They tried it in Portugal quite a while ago now. They were the first country to ever try that. They just made it legal to, they just took the criminal justice system out of the equation completely. Wow. So if people got caught, they'd be referred to programs. They'd have, if they were addicts, they'd go into rehab. They have all those resources the same, but there's no point in throwing an addict into prison. I mean, it's pointless exercise. It achieves nothing. It just turns them into a hopeless addict and a hopeless criminal.
Right.
So right. It just doesn't achieve anything. If your objective is to help the person or to, get them to use drugs responsibly, then that's not going to do it. And then everywhere they've tried it, they're talking about that in Vancouver, Canada right now. There's it's in the process right now. They're voting on it, whether to legalize small amounts of all drugs. Because I mean, you pick an addict up on the street. There's no point in processing them through the criminal justice system and putting them in jail and fining them. I mean, it's a pointless waste of time.
Right.
So we have to do something else because that's not working. And when I was growing up in England in the 70s, there was a heroin epidemic going on in my hometown. Actually, Crawley, Sussex, had the highest number of registered heroin addicts in the British Isles. And I knew probably 24 addicts, and they would go and get a prescription. So they instituted this program where they gave them a prescription, English pharmaceutical heroin. They went to they got assessed as to their level or whatever, or their dosage. Then they'd go to the chemist every once a week, and they'd pick up their prescription, the pharmaceutical heroin, and a box of syringes, and then they'd go home, and they'd shoot up. They satisfy their addiction, but they didn't. When they instituted that program, the crime rate plummeted. Because these addicts, all they do all day long is think about a fix.
Sure.
So if you take that away and just give them what they need, like a medicine. I mean, if somebody's in pain and they need OxyContin, you give them OxyContin. If they're in psychological pain and they're doing heroin, you throw them in jail.
Yeah.
So It doesn't work. And it worked in England. And I saw that work firsthand. I saw all these people, pretty much everybody I knew that was a heroin addict in England at the time and went through this program actually got off heroin. There was a total success. Not only that, they stopped breaking into cars, they stopped breaking into houses, they stopped stealing everywhere, they stopped, spending every waking moment looking for a fix on the street, hanging out with sketchy people. So they just hung out in their rooms and read science fiction novels and went walking around at night with dark glasses on, and they weren't a problem to anybody. Yeah. The other thing about heroin addicts is that people miss is that they're actually very sensitive people. Every heroin addict I've ever known has this sensitivity. They're fragile people. They're fragile psychologists. They're not, monsters. They're actually very, very they're kind of sad. They're hypersensitive in a lot of ways, and they just can't hack it. They can't hack the everyday life. They can't hack the job and the boss and the wages and the bills. They just can't do it. So they shrink back and they wrap themselves in this cotton wool blanket of heroin, and all their problems go away. So it's not a great solution, but it's the only solution available to them. So once you take away the every waking minute looking for a fix and having to get money for a fix, well, you take that away from their lives, and they just sit around and think about their life and think, well, what am I going to do next? They have that time, they have that space to reevaluate what they're doing. And in most cases that I knew about, they turn their lives around, and they're now, productive members of society, which is the goal, right?
Yeah. I think somehow it's just become embedded in society that we have to just persecute these people constantly. I mean, if I'd be just fully disclosed, that in my younger days, I've never tried a psychedelic. I don't know the experience, but you're kind of conditioned to believe it's all bad all the time. And I think it's a layover from the moral panic of the Victorian times, Christian morality. Yeah. Like if you're doing a drug, that's a frivolous thing, and that's somehow sinful, and it's bad, and it's morally bankrupt. It's a moral issue, I think. It's an underlying moral issue that people have with it. They think that it's immoral to get high, basically. Yeah. So I think with the new attitudes towards psychedelics, we're seeing it can actually be a positive thing to get high. Right. And it's obviously not a positive thing to be a crack addict. No, never.
We have solutions to that too. So we just have to rethink it. We're stuck in these modes of thinking. We need to be doing more psychedelics to think about psychedelics.
There you go. Well, it was so fascinating when this guy from Colombia, I mean, the central heart of cartel land in Latin America, and he just outlined. It might have been a moral thing back then, but in practicality in Colombia, they're so rich, they control the government, they control the politics, they bought off all the politicians. This money that's being made from this illegal activity is funding atrocities all across Latin America. My wife was born and raised in Venezuela. If you took the drug money out of Venezuela, the banking system would collapse in one day. It's all propped up by these cartels laundering just hundreds of millions of dollars. So there's no perfect solution when we look at this, but it's fascinating. I talked to him, and then to talk to you, it's like we need to reevaluate what's going on and why we're doing what we're doing, rather than just assume blanket. Because back in the 70s, we had some presidents start a war on drugs that obviously has failed at every level. So
I think the way to deal with the cartel problem and the whole rotten business is to take the money out of it. That's the legalization argument again.
There you go.
If you take the money out of it and you give people their prescriptions for free on the health system, there's no money on the street for it, and the cartels have got no business, and they'll move to something else.
There you go. And that's what he was saying. It's like they have so much money, they're buying off every politician to do anything, whatever they want to do, whenever they want to do it. And that's not in the best interest of the whole society. That's just in the best interest of the cartels. So interesting. But So Jimmy, you mentioned in your book, and I saw it's a long book. Was it like you wrote a long book there. It's what, 300, 250, 300 pages long, something like that.
320, I think.
Yeah, a long book. But so can you just give the listeners just kind of a flavor of some of maybe there's a story that stands out to you, like that's maybe one of the most profound ones, or give us a little flavor of, like, from all your travels and experiences, something that stands out to you from your book.
Well, that's tough because there's been so many, and that was a big problem with the book. Is like I wanted to put the peak experiences in, and there was so many.
Right, and longer than War and Peace.
I had to edit them down quite drastically. I don't know. I think some of my experiences at raves were probably my first experience at a rave was definitely one of the most profound experiences of my life. I was 40 years old. This is 1996. I'm 65 now. And a friend of mine that I babysat as a baby, as a 1-year-old, came to visit me. It was my friend's son. Mm-hmm. So he showed up at my door in Vancouver and said, there's this new thing called rave, and everybody's going to raves, and they're great, and it's new music. And I'm a musician, so I was interested in the music, but I'd never heard electronic dance music before.
Right.
So he said, and there's this new drug called MDMA, and you take this drug and you go to the rave, and everybody's super friendly and happy, and it's fantastic, and it's the latest, greatest thing.
Right.
So I said, okay, that sounds good. I'm in. So I took a hit of MDMA, went into this rave, and a Salvation Army, an ex-Salvation Army church. So the DJs are up in front of the stained glass windows and the altar, and there's about 400 or 500 people there. There's several rooms. Everybody's dressed in these crazy costumes. It was like walking into another world. And then when the E started to kick in, the MDMA started to come up on that, and it was just this connection. I got swept up with the music. I'd never heard music like it before. Just this continuous, thunderous stream of pounding beats like a shaman's drum, and it was hypnotic. Right. And I started to dance for the first time in 25 years.
Wow.
And as the night wore on, it just got more and more profound. I felt this intense connection and empathy with myself and with everybody there. And we were just like one complete whole, flock of birds or shoal of fish, all just moving, pulsing to this beat. It was a transcendental experience. I've done a lot of meditation in my life too, and I've had some powerful experiences in meditation. But that was the most powerful meditation I ever had. It was like, oh, this is it. This is how you become one with the universe,
Wow.
So that was pretty profound. And I, danced all night till 7 o'clock in the morning. The sun came up through the stained glass windows. And, if I believed for a second in God, I would have been praising the Lord right there.
Yeah.
But I walked out into the morning, this crisp new morning, and it was a new day, and, the new phase of my life that I began. And then I became a rave promoter and started putting on these parties because I thought they were so great and everybody should try it.
Yeah, incredible. So is that, I don't assume that probably every time someone would do that, they would get an identical experience. I mean, I assume there's varying levels of this.
Yeah, it's one of the most reliable and consistent experiences in the drug world, though. I mean, people have a lot of different experiences on LSD and psilocybin, and they're really dependent upon your psychology, where you're at, like what Leary called set and setting, your frame of mind and your environment. They're very, very, very tied into that. MDMA less so, because MDMA is not really a true psychedelic. It's more of an empathogen. So it just engenders this feeling of empathy, not just with people around you, but with yourself. You get this connection that, I think people are really missing in their lives. But when I was doing parties I did about 35 different rave events, usually one a month, and had this very, very tight-knit group of people. We had this organization called SPEC, which was the Society for the Perpetuation of Empathogenic Celebrations. So we have 300 people on an email list, send them the email, the approved locations, secret locations, warehouses and buildings and whatnot. So we'd all show up and we do these parties. And I routinely saw people's lives change at those events, people coming in cold, from nowhere, and then getting swept up in the experience. And you could just see them change. And in the morning, their mouths would be hanging open. They say, wow, that's the first time that I've ever felt like that. It's the first time I've ever felt, that I love myself. It's the first time that I ever felt connected to a group of people. And it's as a group of strangers, like socially awkward people would come in and just, I saw, hundreds of people's lives transformed through that experience. And it was quite a unified experience. I very rarely saw anybody have any type of negative effect on MDMA. It was always the same type of positive effect that they had. So it's one of the most consistent, reliable drug experiences that you can get.
Yeah, it's fascinating that compared to some of these religious experiences, where you go all the way back to ancient times, or it's almost literally a transformative event. That's not, you drink alcohol, you get drunk, you might be happy, but then the next day you feel completely and utterly horrible when you come down after getting drunk. Yeah. This is completely, it's such a fascinating thing. But you do hear, Jimmy, what do you say to those who say, oh, I hear all about those negative trips, or you'll see a movie where someone is high on a psychedelic and they have this horrific, awful, terrible, horrifying experience. What causes that, or what do you think attributes to that when people go through that side of it versus, say, the positive side of things?
Well, it's because they have psychological disturbances in the first place. And the psychedelics don't put anything in your mind that isn't already there. Really? They just amplify what's there. They're like amplifiers. So if you're disturbed and you take a high dose LSD, you're probably going to get very disturbed because it's going to amplify that. So It's all about use and misuse. You need to start very low dose, and it's if somebody has a bad experiences on psychedelics, it's because they've misused them.
Yeah,
they've either done the wrong frequency or dosage, the wrong mindset, the wrong environmental setting. They've done something wrong. And it's not hard, the information is out there. It's not hard to get it right these days. Right. You just have to use them responsibly, and if you do, it's virtually impossible to go sideways. Right.
Okay, very good. So one last question I have for you. So if you're talking to somebody who has never tried psychedelic drugs, holds a very traditional view of drugs in general, what would you want them most to understand about psychedelics in general? Or even, people always relate well to stories and how that's actually impacted your life in the long term. You've obviously got a 50-year journey of using this. So talk a little bit to someone who's listening to this, says there's no way, I don't want to hear any of that. A drug's a drug. And what would you most want them to understand, if you could, about psychedelics?
Well, I think the first thing I'd do is recommend that they read my book.
Of course.
Confessions of an Ethical Drug Dealer by Jimmy Fritz. Available at fine bookstores everywhere.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, there's only one negative psychedelic experience that I ever had. And it was the first time I took LSD. And I was 15 years old. Mm-hmm. And I just took it and I didn't know what it was. We were experimenting with this and that. We were just kids. And somebody said, do you want to try this trip, man? And I said, okay. So I took this, what turned out to be 350 micrograms of purple microdot. So it's an incredibly strong dose. Wow. And it was the first time, and I didn't know anything about LSD or anything about the effects. And I just swallowed this thing and I went to hell and back. And I described the experience in my book in quite great detail. Uh-huh. And I did it to just offset that this is what happens if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, and the rest of the book is sort of explaining how to do it right. Interestingly enough, I had that memory, and that's a 50-year-old memory. Mm-hmm. Well, I know how unreliable memories are because I've studied memory to some degree.
Sure.
So I was wondering how accurate it would be. Well, I sent it to a friend of mine that I knew at the time in England. Sent him a copy of the book, and he read it, and he called me up and he said, that experience you had with LSD, the really bad one? I said, yeah. Uh-huh. He said, that's exactly how you recounted it the day after it happened.
Wow.
Because I saw this guy that it was the day after or the day after the day after. Anyway, it's very recent. And I explained and I told him about the whole trip. And he said it was exactly almost word for word what was in the book, which was gratifying that my memory was right.
Yeah.
But then he said that because of that experience at the time, he decided and vowed that he would never do LSD in his life. And that's why in the next 50 years, he'd never tried it.
Oh, my goodness.
But when I spoke to him, and we're both 65 now. So when I spoke to him recently, he read the book and he said, I'm really interested in trying to microdose LSD now because he has problems with depression. And he's been battling that for decades, apparently. So now he's microdosing LSD with excellent results.
Wow. Incredible.
So that's what I would say. I'd say if you want to know about psychedelics and a positive, how they can affect a life in a positive, upbeat way, then read my book.
Yeah, there you go. So was it a combination of physical and psychological that made it so bad? Or, I mean, was it like heart racing? Was it?
Oh, I thought it was dead. I thought it was a lizard. I thought it
was
crazy. The guy I was with went nuts and smashed up my apartment. I mean, it was a total nightmare. And it still remains to this day the only negative effect I've ever had.
Yeah, amazing. So
that's the warning, that if you don't do it right, and you don't take these things seriously, and you don't do them responsibly, and you don't respect frequency and dosage and setting, then you can have a bad experience. Right. If you do respect those things and you do it properly, it may change your life in very, very powerful and profound ways.
Right. Yeah. That's I think that's almost a great spot where we can even stop there. But, I think it just strikes me so strongly as human consciousness, because I think we just assume life is what it is as it is, and there's no other layers. And sometimes we get so wrapped up in the stuff that we're experiencing on our five senses that it's probably just the tip of the iceberg of our total existence. And it appears psychedelic experience is something unless you get deeper, right? It lets you go inside rather than that focus on all the external stuff.
Yeah, there's a whole new world out there to try.
Yeah. So, I think the psychedelics, I've never tried them, but they're fascinating. And I appreciate you so much taking the time to come on here. And Jimmy, so I'm going to for everybody, I'm putting the link to Jimmy's book underneath. And so you can just click it and go ahead and buy Jimmy's book there. And is there do you do social media at all or anything like that, Jimmy? Or
I have a website because I'm also a musician. So I've got 5 albums. I've got 28 music videos that I've made in my original songs in the last couple of years. And they're all everything's on my website at jimmyfritz.ca.
Awesome. So there you go, jimmyfritz.ca. And so check out Jimmy wherever you want to find, but especially that book. And once again, it's been a pleasure to have you on, Jimmy. And I so appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks a lot, David. All
the
right. Best.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the podcast today. I so hope you found value in the topic today. Every single day, if we can expand our perspective just a little bit on any range of topic, whether it be about our physical body, intellectual sharpness and perspective, or spiritual growth, then if we stay consistent in the long run, we all become more well-rounded people able to cope with all manner of events in life. I always appreciate you clicking like or follow to this podcast. Generally, a new episode is published every single week. And please, if you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear about them. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week until we talk again.